Black Rifle Coffee, baby. Pretty cool.
But we're talking about Richard High. You probably know him as Angry Cops through social media and what he's dealing with. I'm talking to him right now to see if we can do a remote show with him. But basically, he working through the SVU, the Special Victims Unit in Buffalo, New York. He is, I guess you could say, he's doing a whistleblower situation with bringing to light some of the things he's dealing with some school district and the district attorney, assistant district attorney, and they're kind of hiding some of these situations and a couple instances in which some kids have reported assault against them, one from a parent and then the other one from an individual who came into
a crazy person
who came into it's like a school attached to like a science center.
It was a magnet school. Yes.
Yeah. So, and for some reason there's access, like you can just like walk into the science center and get into the school somehow, which is a public area. Like, for the most part, like if you see some crazy person wandering around the school, you're gonna be like, get that fucking guy out of here.
That's not a teacher.
But they didn't have this place secured, and this fucking crazy person took advantage of that, and did some nasty things to some kids. And Rich is saying that they deleted the video evidence of this abuse. Which is just like, it's mind-boggling to think that that's even a possibility within our society and our culture today.
They stated it was the school, someone in the school district did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, there's not too much to say other than how fucking horrible it is. And God bless Richard for bringing this to light and having the balls to do it, because you're like, you don't know how. I can't even imagine the frustration that he's going through dealing with this stuff, because you're like, this is, if there's anything that's cut and dry in our society, it should be this.
Yeah.
And he is an individual whose job it is to make sure things like this get handled. They're not getting handled, and so like he's probably, at his wit's end with this position. And this is just some instances. Like, this dude puts himself out there and like has served our country in so many different ways. And this is now he puts himself in the shoes of working the Special Victims Unit, which I can't even imagine the amount of emotional and mental trauma that you dealing with these situations where kids are being taken advantage of.
Worst of the worst.
It's literally the worst.
That's not property crimes where you're dealing with somebody's window getting smashed in because there were some quarters in there.
Yeah. Or some fucking meth head blowing his trailer up. Like, it's the worst of the worst.
Yeah. And it's crazy that our society almost universally agrees that these kind of offenders are the biggest scumbags out of them all, but we still the laws have not caught up to our disdain for those people. Like, their prison sentences are not adequate to the nature of their crimes.
No.
I think I've talked to police officer friends in West Texas, all over the country. I think this is a common frustration that a lot of them are dealing with. It's not just a Buffalo problem. I think this is happening all over the country where, red tape, things don't get handled the way they should, especially when it comes to those kind of crimes.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's a systems issue at this point. If this is the case, and it's not just Buffalo, but I'm sure the red tape that police officers have to deal with. I mean, you hear stories about it all the time, to where like my like I had a friend in Salt Lake who had a situation to where like this dude was banging on her car window, and this girl felt threatened in the middle of the night, called the cops. Cops show up, and the cops are like, all right, I'll go talk to him. He was a truck driver. Like, yeah, he was like hitting my car, threatening me. Cop goes up to him and is like, he says he didn't do it. I don't have anything to, and it's like, there's this ability for people to operate in this gray.
Yeah.
Like you're saying.
And the cops have to operate within certain parameters that unless they have hard evidence, they can't really do anything.
Yeah. It's the idea of the law of man versus the rule of man. Before governments and society, there's just everything from a respect perspective,
Yeah.
right? When things were a little bit more primal,
Yeah.
when we were living out of a little bit more
They'd handle
rural
these situations by
digs.
throwing rocks at each other.
Yeah, if you disrespect me or my family, you are met with force.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. And if you allow yourself to be disrespected, then they just continue to take advantage of your weakness, right?
Yeah.
They'll steal.
That still
your
exists,
food.
but
Yeah.
it's definitely in a different form now. It's a little more strategic and political, and
Yeah. I mean, we really are like, we have all these gadgets and everything, which is really funny, like this hybrid existence that we have with, and the juxtaposition of this, like we're meat animals.
yeah,
That when you look at how animals act in the wilderness, when there's a kill and you have a lion eating its dinner and trying to feed its cubs, and then you've got all these other scavengers, like it may not directly seem that our life is like that now, but it is. It really is.
100%.
Like we're 100% living out that. It's just like kind of hard to see with our current landscape and these concrete jungles that we live in now. That's 100% the way it is.
we
That
see it with mob mentality. We see it with. I mean, just look at a bunch of bros at the bar on a Saturday, young dudes at the bar on a Saturday night. They're playing out the same thing that's being played out in the Serengeti, just, with nice collared shirts and cell phones.
Yeah, 100%.
But at the end of the day, they're in their mating ritual. They're trying to get some.
Yeah, that makes me think I talk about this all the time, but I haven't done it yet. I think this was John Dudley's idea. But I want to do a video that's like if humans acted like elk, and like witnessing elk in the rut is just like a beautiful thing. And like imagining if humans were to do the same thing, like conduct themselves in the same way, and we're able to get the same responses, which in a way I can, like, we're just not all doing the same things, but like it makes me think of like, so if you were to do it, you're just like, it's just like one man like walking out into an open area, like into a field, like, I have a big dick.
Yeah.
Come to me. Come to
breed
me.
you.
I will save you. But they actually come,
Yeah.
right? Like the women just like start showing up out of the woods.
I want you.
And then, but then because all of these women are being drawn in, these like lesser men are also coming in, and you can see them on
Taking
the fringes.
scraps.
Yeah, they're like, maybe I can get that one. And then you see like 5, kind of like nerdy, younger men who aren't quite in their prime, like kind of trying to get in there and take the scraps. And
then the one that wants to fight the main one because he thinks, he's the one that should be in charge.
Yeah, dude, we gotta do that. We gotta film that. I was thinking about this episode, and obviously, I think about every time we talk a decent amount about history in general.
Something we're both comfortable with.
Yeah.
You're also one of the only people at Black Rifle, especially of the OGs. You are like, out of all those guys, you're the only one that likes sports with balls, like football and baseball and.
Yeah, I go through phases for sure. I get really pissed off if I like last year I was like into the Lions.
Your hometown.
My hometown, like the team I've loved my whole life, and it was disappointment in a different way. And I really had this I'm really kind of sour towards like the amount of time and energy I dedicated towards watching them and paying attention to them. Like, I was like, and then I start doing math and I'm like, oh my God, like, I could have spent, 100 hours working on. I'm like 100 hours. Oh my God, I could have got so much done in 100 hours. And like now that I'm doing it every Saturday and every Sunday, and like, oh my God, but it's like kind of a thing that I do communally with my father and my brother. So it's like kind of a way for us to get together. So like, I guess that's kind of okay. But I just beat this up in my head and I have this conversation with
And your
myself
brother's like on the ground. He's in the thick of it.
Yeah,
Lions.
which is cool because it's like it's a reason for me to holler at my brother. My brother is a photographer, media content creator, but he he's like a contractor for the NFL, so he's on the sidelines for every single Lions game, and he's done quite a few. Like he worked at Pro Bowl, and he works for the Red Wings and the other thing. But I kind of go back and forth, and you're going to Fenway this weekend to go see a baseball game. I've like, if I get a baseball game in like once a year, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
It's
nice to just go out to the park.
It is.
And now with the little guy, that'll be some fun bonding you can have with him as he gets older and can comprehend, the game.
Yeah. Cause that's another thing too. It's like, what are you going to do with your son? It's not like, I'm not going to start pistol training him when he's 5 years old yet. So it's like, maybe we should, play catch or something first, we could do that. That'd probably be a little bit easier. Less weight. I'm like slaying my son. I'm like, no, you don't do the fishing pole. Like you get that barrel straight down range first. All right. Like you pull it up 90 degrees down range and then you present, and he's like, I don't want to do this, Dad. You don't want to condition them in a bad way. You want them to like want to do that stuff before you start giving them the rundown on all those things, right?
Yeah. My nephews, anytime I go to visit, my nephews want to play catch. And when they were 5, 6, 7, it was tough because their coordination's off. They can't catch everything you're throwing at them. They can't throw accurately. I think it's when they hit 7 or 8 years old, all of a sudden, that ball was coming in with heat, accurately. They were catching everything I was throwing at them. And it physically wore me out. Like I couldn't keep up with them, how hard and fast they were throwing that ball, and they could have done it all day long.
Yeah. I try not to talk about dad stuff too much because I remember when I wasn't a dad and how much anytime the conversation went towards fatherhood, I just kind of tuned out. But it was funny last night because you can see like one of the beauties about fatherhood, whether you're there or you're not, is like it fucking energizes you. And there's this instinctual thing that like you have a gear that you don't know you have until you have a kid, because they're exhausting and you got to keep up with them, right? And there is something that happens inside of you from the time that they're born through the time that they develop that you're like, oh shit, okay, like I gotta go. And it is really rewarding to get that other gear.
Do you sleep better now too if you're going 100% all day?
No. It's just you just don't. It's like when you're in the Marine Corps and you're like, I don't want to have to dig a fighting hole in the rain and then do watch. But because of the gravity of the situation for what you're doing in its totality, you're like, oh, I don't care.
You understand.
You understand that you're part of something larger, and so you just don't think about it. Yeah. Like you can just kind of tune that out. The way that I think a lot of people when they're doing a super long movement or they're doing something extremely difficult, you just have this ability to like shut a switch off or like turn a dial down to where you're like, oh, this isn't providing that much discomfort because I have this awareness that this is a part of something larger that I'm like really working towards and that it's building something. So I like that. So it's not such a big deal. Right?
And there's other people going through it with you.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
not something you're dealing with alone.
You're not dealing with it alone. Sometimes you are. Like last night, my wife was up in Austin and she works for Cam Haynes, and he came out with another book, and so he was doing the podcast rounds up there. So I was like, I had the evening shift with little man, And you can already, like, he just has this like go capability. And he's not the biggest fan of being stagnant already. Like, surprise, surprise. But so a lot of times what I have to do is like, I just have to walk with this dude. He doesn't want to like even sit and play. Like, staying in the same place is like a nightmare to him. And you can see this like anxiety build up with him, and he starts making a bunch of noises.
Yeah.
And like, so he just wants to move.
Is he like throwing stuff and all that?
He's to the point where like he's mastering crawling right now. And he's like round ball, round hole, round ball, round hole. You know, he's like he's really working his dexterity and his hand-eye coordination, and like you can see how quick he's progressing on that stuff. But he like, but so I go on a walk with him, and he like passes out in my arms. I sent a video to Matt last night. I'm just like, look how fucking cute this little dude is, you know. And so it's about trying to think of why this thing started. It's about like these understandings of activity at different stages in your life, and things that you can do over time. And, you know, when you start introducing these sort of things, like he's gonna look at all these guns on the wall when he gets older, and I'm gonna be like, you can't touch that yet.
Right.
And he's gonna be like, what the fuck?
You have what, like good 3-4 years before you have to have that discussion?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. Like, I think he's around like right before 2, there's gonna be like, hey, you don't touch this thing.
Yeah.
And then he's gonna be like, why? And then he's gonna be like, I want to do the opposite of what I'm told to do, so I want to touch that thing. So you got to be conscious of that. But just as far as like the communal things that we can do that tap into family and brotherhood and all that sort of thing, right? When we come back to ball sports, we like ball sports, right? And growing up, so I'm like, plus like we live in South Texas. Like, this is the high school football mecca.
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
Like, this is the center of it. Like, you look at Friday Night Lights, like that's here. Like, Bernie High School, which is right down the road, went to the 5A championship last year.
Yeah. That
2 years
school
ago.
district, from what I understand, is one of the best in the entire state.
Yeah.
Not just academically, but athletically. Like, I had no idea. I don't know if you know Dallas Page. He's on the school board here.
Diamond Dallas Page?
No, that one. Pipes. I'm sorry. Dallas Pipes. He's on the school board here. But he...
Diamond Dallas Page.
Yeah, this is a very involved community when it comes to the high school, academically and athletically.
Yeah.
We sent those kids to the Little League World Series.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and they went far. It was a big deal for the community.
It was. I remember watching that with my dad.
Yeah.
They lost the championship.
Yep. Yeah. Very unfortunate. Because those kids, they can only pitch a certain amount of innings, so they had to pull.
Yeah, it's a really interesting strategy that you have to like undertake with that stuff, because it is regulated to that high degree, right?
I'm glad we're not allowing 12-year-olds to throw out their arms. I think it's a good thing.
Why? What are we teaching them? Yeah. What are we teaching them, Jack? That you can't push yourself. Yeah. You can't push yourself to win a championship.
Back in my
what are
day,
you gonna do?
Pitched it. I needed Tommy John surgery at 12. Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting. I think too, like, especially like, you know, you and I are both World War II history buffs.
Yeah.
But the amount of people that were playing professional sports and we're like, fuck this, I'm going to the war.
Oh, in World War II?
Yeah. It was way more, you know, specific. I know you got about a fucking handful of stories that you could reference off the top of your head, but just the one I'm thinking of. So like we're working with Beyond the Call, who Tracy over there, and we've done a whole bunch of stuff with them at this point. And we're like still working on the ability to go back to Iwo Jima and drop off Charlie Kohler's ashes, who Charlie passed away last year. His brother Eddie was buried at sea. from wounds suffered on the beach at Iwo Jima on the first day. And so one of his last requests was to go back to the locations and put his ashes where his brother was.
And this is a
buried
guy
at sea.
who had a family and created an entire life for 80 years after the war.
Yeah.
And he wants to go back to that one place in his life to be with that one person he hasn't seen in 80 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an incredible story. And we're running into all sort of hurdles when it comes to that stuff, from the idea of getting there. Like, we were supposed to be in Iwo Jima.
Yeah, that's not calling up your travel agent and having them book something.
No, I mean, we tried to do it that way, but like, Iwo Jima's in the middle of the fucking ocean, and basically we had spots on a flight. Fucking dignitaries and politicians basically got priority over that, so we got cut off the list for that.
I need to go on a rant when the time is right about that.
Yeah. But anyway, so Charlie was he was set for a professional I think he was baseball career. He was drafted the whole nine. He was ready to go. And then, Pearl Harbor happens and that kicks off, and then he says nope. But we have so many different activities that we watch now. It was a completely different landscape. I don't think that football was even as popular as baseball was back during that time frame.
No.
But like, you have
it
to
took about 20 years for football to start gaining track. Professional football.
Yeah. You really have to like remove yourself from how we sit currently and think about like, baseball was America. Baseball was everything, because it was the thing that everybody could participate in the time. Like, it was our soccer.
It's why we have round grenades in the United States.
I saw that factoid the other day, which is so interesting.
All those Europeans were throwing those potato mashers with the sticks. They gave American boys round grenades because every American boy grew up throwing a baseball.
Yeah, which didn't happen until after World War II, right?
No,
because we had the pineapple grenade in World War II.
Yes. Now, I can't speak to that a lot, but I know that the circular design was because of that.
The baseball.
Because of the baseball, yeah. The round design.
But when exactly that came about, not 100% sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I have my grandfather's hollowed out pineapple grenade of his.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So how did he get...
He died in the Pacific.
Your grandpa did?
Yeah, my dad's a Gold Star child.
Dude,
I'm a Grand Gold Star child.
Dude, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He died around, not at the Battle Midway, but in 1944, near Midway. He was on they were like spy planes, and it went down in the Pacific.
He was on a spy plane?
Yeah, like a reconnaissance plane.
Yeah.
And it went down. Half the crew was lost. He was one of them. He was the belly gunner, and so he was.
Dude. He didn't get out. How do I not know this?
I mean, it's not something I talk. I mean, it's just one of those family things. Yeah.
True.
But basically, there was a box growing up that, when someone dies, they send their personal effects back to the family, and there's a hollowed out pineapple grenade. One of his old cartridges with all the ammo in it. So we have his old leather cartridge with all the ammo in there. Of course, letters and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, my parents still have all of his personal effects that were sent back to my grandmother. And back then, they didn't have all those SGLI benefits that they have now, so it was just like, my grandmother got a telegram. It's like, sorry, lady, your husband's dead. You better go get remarried.
Right. Yeah. They probably didn't even have, you think about how much money the government would have had to spend if they had SGLI back in that day, right?
They would have been sustainable.
They would have, like, all the money that they made through war bonds would have just immediately went over to SGLI, right?
Yeah.
So he was in the Army Air Corps?
In the Navy. Yeah.
Oh, he was in the Navy.
Yeah, he was a ordnanceman second class. When we did that was the first time I went out and with Don Graves and Tracy from Beyond the Call, we went out to the Punch Bowl in Hawaii, which is I haven't been to all of them, of course, but the most beautiful national cemetery in the country. It's right outside of Honolulu there. It's absolutely gorgeous. But a guy served in the Marine Corps is buried there. Got to see his name. And then my grandfather is on the Hall of the Missing. It's a big wall with all the MIA from World War II. So I got to go like look at my grandfather's name on the wall, and pretty cool. Yeah.
Interesting.
My dad was 9 months old. So just, yeah.
He was basically one of those, well, I'm going to war. We got to pump a kid out before just in, like, your dad was a just in case fucking baby,
That's
huh?
exactly what happened. He was home on leave. You know what's crazy too? Not to be complicated with the family dynamic, but my grandmother's brother was Bob, and they all grew up together. They went to Venice High in West LA. They're together. Bob and his brother-in-law, my grandfather, they were like best friends growing up. My Uncle Bob was with him the night before he went up for that mission, and he said they got lit. Like, for all I know, my grandfather was like hung over in the belly of that aircraft when it went down. He said they got lit the night before.
Really?
And then my Uncle Bob literally watched his plane take off, and that was last time he saw him.
No shit.
And my Uncle Bob ended up being like basically a father figure to my dad growing up.
Yeah. And so did they join together?
Yeah, they all graduated from Venice High and went to the war together.
Like Venice, California?
Yeah, at Venice Beach there. Yeah.
Okay.
I was born in Santa Monica. I spent the first 5 years of my life in Culver City, California.
Dude, you're a Cali boy.
I claim Minnesota because I have little recollection, but yes, I come from California lineage on my dad's side.
Dude, that's awesome.
My dad went to Venice High.
Well, in full circle for you too, going and being in California for your Marine Corps career.
Oh, and that's great because I still had family up there. So on the weekends, I would go up and I got to go visit family. I had family in the valley there, around Malibu, all over Southern Marietta, right outside of the base there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't have to always be drunk at the barracks. I had options to go be around, more familiar people.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was like, that was the magnet for anybody. Like really when you're coming up, because you're so like overwhelmed with what you're trying to do when you're in SOI, and you're like, okay, we finally get a weekend off. What do we do? And you're all like, yeah. And everybody's, except I think I was only 20 when I graduated. I wasn't 21 yet. So like,
but you find it.
Well, yeah, you do. I mean, you basically like, we just get a hotel room somewhere and you pile five or six.
There's always that one guy that joined when he was already 21. So like he could get the beer.
Yeah. But that's what it was. Unless you knew somebody who was from there, and then you could like go to a house party and like get in with some locals.
There's always that one kid in the platoon that's a local. Yeah.
You didn't have to spend money on a hotel. I was like, do you remember how much money we made as like young infantrymen?
It was what, like $500 a paycheck? Something like that?
I think we made like 13 grand a year.
Yeah.
13. It was definitely less than, I remember for sure with combat pay when I was in the Marine Corps, 100% less than 20K a year.
Yeah.
Could you imagine
and you
trying to
off of that?
Oh yeah. Well, you didn't have a choice.
You didn't have a choice, yeah.
And granted, like you've got the chow hall,
which technically they're taking out of your paycheck anyways. You're still paying for that.
Paying for it. But yeah, you imagine living off 17 grand a year?
Not
today?
now. No, not at 41. No, I'm spending my money on, plane tickets to Boston just to go watch baseball.
Right. Yeah, but man, it's like, again, like going back to like, you don't even think about it because like the mission is greater than the specific step in which you are.
And when you're young, you can just handle, like, you don't need much when you're young. Some booze, get a lady when you can, and your buddies.
Yeah. As long as like you've got a good system of like getting nicotine and alcohol, like you just get by.
But they were like $3.50 a pack back then.
Yeah, they were, huh? Yeah, there was like
a can of dip was like $2.
Yeah, I know.
We all dipped Grizzly because it was $1 cheaper than Kodiak.
Yeah,
or in Copenhagen and all that.
They had some different type of fiberglass in Grizzly. I remember it would cut you up way different, but I liked it. Cut you up. I think I was like, I remember taking some of that. It's like it reminded me of the pink insulation that you'd use in drywall. Like, you remember like that feeling of,
Yeah.
I'm like, I think they used that same stuff in that insulation, and that's what they put it into Grizzly, because like, dude, I like definitely trimmed years off my life with the amount of Grizzly that I put in my body.
Oh, you'd sleep with it in.
Dude, I was wondering, so when did you join the Marine Corps?
2000. I went to boot camp in 2002. I actually joined like August 11th, 2001. I joined like a month before 9/11. Yeah. I thought I was going to like go to Thailand and go on a, do some like.
So what spurred that desire to go into the Marine Corps before 9/11?
I think that had been building. A lot of people have like really romantic stories about why they joined. I think for me, I was a bored kid from the suburbs who wanted to have like his Hemingway moment, right? I knew the Marine Corps wasn't going to be a long-term thing, but I wanted to like buy 4 years and go do some cool shit. Because the majority of people I grew up with basically went off to college, and I just didn't want to do it. And so I was like, I'll buy 4 years and go do some wild shit. I think that was the core of my motivations.
You were so it wasn't romantic. You were just thinking about fucking Hemingway when you were 18 years old and having your Hemingway moment.
I wasn't thinking about Hemingway back then. But in hindsight, it was like I needed to go out and have my adventure, right? Which is such a Hemingway thing.
Yeah.
I'm not comparing myself to Ernest Hemingway by any means, but
no, but that like the idea of adventure,
the boy needs to leave home, and that what better way for a young American youth, unless you're a trust fund kid and you can go on your European backpacking trip. No, you join the military. Depending on the branch, you can get around.
Yeah. And so were you like, what was your high school like? When you say that, like, it makes me think like you were reading some literature that got you thinking a certain way back then, or there had to be some sort of spur that ignited this desire in you.
I think honestly a lot of it had to do with knowing what happened to my grandfather. It's crazy. Like,
do you remember when that kind of like registered? Like, oh fuck, like my grandpa died in the fucking war. Blitzed. Fucking
well,
ocean.
I didn't find about that till years later, probably in my 20s. Actually, my Uncle Bob, that guy would drive all the way down, and he was like, at the time, he was like 85 years old. He'd drive all the way down from San Francisco in his old Buick, all the way down to Pendleton. That's like a 10-hour drive. And he would see me off on every deployment.
Really?
Yeah. But I think I got to spend like a Thanksgiving with him when I was in the service. He came down from San Francisco and spent, at that point he was a widower. And anyways, I remember him telling, that's when he started telling me the stories. Cause at that point I was an adult. No, I mean, I don't know I think when I was young, I understood, that had happened. I understand it better now. But my dad was a corpsman, a Navy corpsman, Greenside corpsman. My uncle, his brother was a Marine. So I think that was all kind of fed into that interest in going that route.
Yeah.
And where I grew up in Minnesota, God, I love where I come from, but it's not like it's not like here in San Antonio where everybody's dad or uncle served at one point, right? It wasn't a common thing where I grew up to have a father who was a veteran.
Yeah.
Minnesota, there's kind of specifically where I grew up, the standard white, German or Scandinavian Minnesotan, they kind of go down the same path in life. You graduate high school, you go to college, you start a family, you work for 3M or whatever, Honeywell, and you have your nice suburban home.
Yeah.
And you buy your boat and you go fishing at the cabin on the weekends. That's life.
Yeah. That really makes me think of Ethan Nagel, who's the other Marine whose wife is working for 3M right now.
Yeah.
Who's in Minnesota.
Yeah, he's Minnesotan, yeah. And Ethan, the last time I talked to him, I don't think he has any desire to leave. It's a great state.
Well, no, because his wife works for fucking 3M. I remember having this
they're in a good
conversation with
position.
him,
Yeah,
like,
it's such a nice state, high state income tax, but they do get a return on their investment. Like, no place is perfect, but I grew up in a really good public education system. I know. Like,
you can tell.
I talked to Mark Schmitz,
Yeah.
who's with the company. He grew up.
Another Marine.
Yeah.
Or no, sorry. That's Mark Fannin.
Yeah.
Mark Schmitz is Army guy.
Army guy. But he grew up in Minnesota, and we were talking about that at VAS this last week. About I didn't realize till years later how nice of a public school system I came from. It was really good, compared to other places.
Yeah, I think your passion and desire to pursue history speaks to that quite a bit.
Yes, that was something I naturally want to do, but that school system definitely like allowed me to dive into that.
Yeah, and so you've got this like thing, this Hemingway adventurous. Your grandfather having the role that he had, and you go and sign the paperwork. But then 9/11 happens, the war fervor begins, and 6 months later, you're in boot camp?
Yeah, I was in boot camp in June of 2002. So, yeah, 8 months after 9 months
yeah.
after 9/11. Yeah, and you remember, I remember I was probably 7 years old when Desert Storm happened. So I remember that being the first time realizing there's a life beyond my cartoons in my home because my parents were glued to the TV. Well, we watched Desert Storm be done in 3 days, right? To me, that's what American war was. Like, oh, we'll just go and beat the shit out of this conventional army and go home. So after 9/11 happened, I was like, oh shit, I'm going to miss out on everything. This is going to be done. Because we sent troops in Afghanistan real fast.
Yeah.
I thought I was just going to miss out on everything. Little did we know.
Little did we know. Take this as much as like so many people impacted at 9/11. Do you ever like go back and you like look at that? Do you have any questions when it comes to that?
About what happened in New York and DC?
Yeah.
No, it's not something I think about a lot. I do. The thing is, I do know a lot of people that were either in Lower Manhattan or had family members killed. So I think it's good for me to, when that time of the year comes around when that time of the year comes around, I do get to sometimes socialize with people that remind you of how heavy, even for someone that we both remember it. We watched it in high school. Obviously, we were part of the conflicts that, came after. Even after 20 years, it's easy for us to start getting complacent and not attaching ourselves emotionally to that. And I think it's good that I have access to certain people that can tell you how fucked up of a day it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
My buddy Scott lost one of his cousins who was like his best friend and another first cousin, both in Lower Manhattan there.
Yeah.
And so Scott's like us. He copes and in non-traditional ways sometimes. You've never seen somebody, he'll send the most effed up 9/11 memes, but when the day comes, like, he is in mourning.
Yeah.
Because it messed him up.
Yeah.
And he was in Brooklyn when it happened, and it's a big reason why he commissioned in the Army.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been to New York a decent amount in the last few years here, and Marty and I went over there for the 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
In 2021, and we got to watch the parade from the roof of the firehouse there, and it kind of bothers me when Americans are like, fuck New York, fuck that liberal state. It's like, I understand your comeuppance against certain
rich
things.
Manhattan people.
Yeah, like, I get that, but that exists in literally every American city.
Go hang
in
out
this
in
country.
Queens.
Yeah. I'm like,
talk to those people. Those are blue collar, hardworking, good Americans.
Yeah, it's like it or not, like that city plays a huge role in who and what it means to be an American. And it's like it's weird.
From day one. That was our first capital.
That was our first capital. That was like, that has so much to do with our culture of fucking hard work. Like if you're in that city, you're like, Jesus Christ, like the old adage, like the city that never sleeps, like it's fucking true. Like it's almost you gotta like condition yourself to be able to sleep a certain way.
Yeah.
Because
it's like going to Vegas. You need to maintain a schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. But it bothers me when it's just like I was bitching about it on the last podcast with Jason Tobiansky when like people boycotted the Olympics last year
in France.
Well, they're like, it's like they didn't want to watch it because of the opening ceremony.
The French are going to do what French do. That's
exactly. And I, in that same kind of attitude and mentality when it comes to like New York in general, I'm like, I'm sorry if it was hard for us, but like you need to go there to like, you know, a lot of people have opinions on World Trade Center 1 and all these things and the fountain and all that stuff. But like, to me, that's, that almost should be mandatory as an American to go back and like, hey, like it or not, like this is now a fucking part of our history and it's scoped to, you know, decades and it will continue to.
We're still living under its shadow.
Yeah.
Even if the global war on terror is over, we are still living the ramifications of that day.
And we're going to continue. Like it will never end. Like, I'm sorry. It's like going through puberty. It happened. Like you can never go back to the way it was before that anymore. And we need to have like a participation and total awareness about what the impact had. And think about all those cops and firefighters who deal with that on a regular basis.
Some of them, I'm sure, are still working in those departments.
Those guys that walk into the firehouse every fucking day and they look at photos of those dudes that did the unthinkable and continue to show up for work every single day and like live this completely different life and really sacrifice what they do to be part of something larger. Like those guys, like that's who I think about when I think of New York and that, and why I want to go watch a fucking ball game at the Yankee Stadium.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. I've got to do that a couple times. It's funny. You look out in the left field, and you know left and right field, and you have all these like dudes that are like clearly from the Bronx, and the Yankees. I think they're the ones that started it, right? But it's I think right after the seventh innings, it's during the seventh inning stretches they go into God Bless America, and these guys are just going ape shit singing God Bless America out there in left field. And I'm looking over them like, these guys have never even left the Bronx before. And they are just loving this country. Yeah. They don't even know anything. They don't even know Iowa exists. Yeah. And they're the most patriotic dudes.
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, speaking of New York too, I watched your Theodore Roosevelt video.
Oh, the Rough Riders one, yeah.
Yeah. And you and I love reminiscing about the Rough Riders, but
just the most, I think it's the coolest unit ever assembled in American history.
I would be pretty close to agree with you there. And just the fact that, so Theodore, he goes down to Cuba, kicks some ass, basically.
Yeah, within a month.
And then he's the governor of New York.
Yep.
What, a couple months later?
A few months later,
How the fuck did that happen?
Well, I mean, for him, the Rough Riders experience was a great resume builder. And the Spanish-American War, I guess you could compare it to Desert Storm in the sense that it, because, you know, the Civil War was like a national tragedy that at that time people were still getting over. It was so fucked up. America was in a dark place post-war, and yes, we had people fighting out in the Western Plains. We all know the Indian Wars and all that, but that was like the equivalent of Korea. It's just like, okay, cool. I guess we're still out fighting. I don't care anymore. The Spanish-American War was like Desert Storm, where that was like pure American superiority. We kicked ass. We're the cool kids on the block. This refound kind of patriotism that happened as a result of that war. And then Teddy Roosevelt was able to capitalize off of that. And he was already kind of a well-known name, at least in at least in political circles. He was a well-known name, but the Rough Riders thing made him into a celebrity. And so, yeah, when he came home, he already came from a well-established New York family. He already had an in, but that locked him in as governor.
Yeah.
And then he got brought on to be vice president of McKinley, who oversaw the Spanish-American War. And then McKinley gets shot in 1901. He's president of the United States.
Boom.
Yeah. And he was 42 at that time.
When he became president.
When he became president,
How old are you right now?
41.
Could you imagine?
Yeah.
But why did he?
We took two different paths.
Why did he come to San Antonio to recruit the Rough Riders?
Well, he'd already been down here a bunch, and that's the amazing thing we love about Teddy, where he did come from this very prestigious New York, wealthy, politically connected family, but he loved roughing it all over. And again, yes, now you can take a flight to Deadwood, you can get to Deadwood, South Dakota, jump on a couple flights and you're there. But back then, that was the Wild West. He was going into no man's land and experiencing America before we really became the America we know today. But so he'd already been down to San Antonio a bit. San Antonio was kind of the last hub before there is nothing between San Antonio, Texas, until you get to California. Yeah. There is nothing in between.
Which is funny because California was like the Spanish.
Yeah, it was still in its infancy, but it was starting to gain a population.
Yeah.
It was a state by, I think, 1858 is when 1860, right before the Civil War.
Yeah. But then we want to go fight against the Spanish in Cuba, and you can just see this flow of America against colonialism from Spain spreading across the country.
Yeah,
creating a fervor.
The whole Western Hemisphere, all the Cuban people wanted them out at that point. They just didn't have the ability to do it, but we were obviously our private businessmen were funding the Cuban Revolution.
Yeah, which is interesting that Spain was able to hold Cuba considering how much of a
500 years, 400 years.
But that was such a huge port for hundreds of years when it came to going down to South America.
Yeah.
All of the trade that came through, the fact that they were able to hold that is really impressive.
It was the hub of the Spanish Empire. That was their cash cow. That's where they dumped all their resources into. Cuba was so it still is to this day in a lot of ways, but back then, that was the heart of the Spanish Empire.
Yeah.
And of course, with the U.S. and other countries too, Mexico. Basically, the only country in the West that didn't give a shit was Canada. They're like, oh, we're happy with what's going on. Everybody else was going to get these Europeans out of here.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Spain was Spain had political power over Cuba, but the U.S. had economic power over Cuba. And those two things were going to butt heads eventually. But Teddy recruited the Rough Riders out of which you and I have been to a few times. The Manger Bar here in San Antonio, which still exists to this day.
Yeah.
And he came down with all these Ivy League dudes from prominent families, and these guys were recruiting gamblers and Indians and vaqueros and miners and just ex-outlaw cowboys and law enforcement guys. It was a ragtag group of dudes.
Yeah. And imagine he shows up to it's a pretty marine story when you think about it, which I think is why I like it so much. But he shows up to the Menger Bar, and this is the hub of where you're doing your recruiting out of, right? Obviously, there's absorbent amounts of alcohol being consumed, yeah. But also the Menger Bar is it's tiny. And it looks like an old, I think it used to be a courthouse or something like that. It feels like it's the bar area is where you imagine a judge standing behind that. Do you remember the exact use that had before it was a bar?
It probably got multiple use. As far as I know, it's always been a bar that's attached to the main hotel there. The bar was first created in 1847, 48. And then somehow the bar attached to the hotel happened around 1858. It's the oldest bar west of the Mississippi that's been continuously running.
No shit.
Yeah.
That's so cool. But imagine Theodore Roosevelt shows up to do this recruiting, and he has a shooting competition
inside the bar.
Yeah. I don't know how, like, if you're down to ride, pun intended there, for a little bit, and the guy who's going to take you to fight the Spanish in Cuba is having a shooting competition in the bar with a bunch of dudes.
Those bullet holes are still there.
You know, gallons of beer deep at the time. You're just like, this is going to be fucking rad.
Yeah.
And
he wanted to scrap. That guy wanted to scrap.
He had and you go back, like, his, you know, he did come from a prominent family, obviously, but like his upbringing, it was pretty traumatic and like had some super dark days. Like, he lost his wife and first child before he was 22, I think. He was super young when that happened. And
his wife and mother died on the same day.
His wife and mother died on the same day.
Yeah.
And he lost his daughter. Like,
they have his journals, and it's just it just there's an X. That's all.
Really?
Yeah.
You think about those guys that go through tremendously hard things and what their output is later in life. Like, he was
a sickly child.
Yeah, he had asthma, right? Or like
Bad.
He had something wrong with his lungs. So like,
Yeah.
he has all of these things stacked against him. And I think he just had this fuck it attitude about life, right?
Yeah. I doubt he ever said no to much.
Yeah.
When presented with opportunities to do stuff. He boxed a kangaroo in the Oval Office.
It's so epic. It's so epic. They would say, I mean, and his coffee consumption is like
legendary.
Renowned.
And bacon and eggs, like coffee, the amount of coffee and bacon and eggs he ate it's what, I don't know if it's the coffee, but it's what killed him. It was stomach issues from his breakfast diet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what, the Spanish-American War?
That put America
like,
on the map. It made us, that was the birth of the American Empire.
Yeah. And
it wasn't World War II. Spanish-American War was really where we showed the world, like, we're going to be contenders.
And that was 1911?
No, it was 1898.
1898.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then...
he was in his presidential bid in 1911, right?
Yeah. I think that's when he was running on the progressive ticket.
Yeah, that's right. Do you know too much about the Bull Moose Party? And
I'm not educated on enough to speak on it deeply. No, I know that Ross Perot it. He really threw things, because even back then it was like, you're the Republican or Democrat. He threw, he was one of those grassroots Ross Perot, even, Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders types that, like, oh, he's going to throw the entire system out of whack if he runs. We don't, like, a Democrat or Republican's probably going to win, but we don't know, because he's going to pull votes from both sides.
Yeah. Interesting. And then, history is so interesting, because it's like putting together a puzzle, but after you start putting the puzzle together, the puzzle starts expanding, and then you realize that you need to put together a different puzzle in order to get this puzzle put together, but that you'll never really have all of the puzzle pieces from the other puzzle that you need to build the puzzle that you're working on, in order to, like, get the true knowledge of what history truly is.
I mean, everything's traceable to another thing. It's like, you can literally trace America existing because of Julius Caesar, if you wanted to. It's very simple, right? If he doesn't invade the British Isles and set up the system of government, the Roman government in Britain, then you don't get what became the post-Roman British monarchical system, and it's a domino effect.
Right. The video you did on the kind of World War I and how that transpired, and the incest situation, like, dude, you're like, you watch that video and you're like, this is so fucked up.
Yeah, they were all related.
How was the world possibly controlled by these people at this point?
It was basically the mob, except they were in power.
Yeah. You go back and I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. And one of the questions you continually have when you watch that show is you're like, why is there so much incest in this show? What the
Based
fuck
off
is
reality.
And it's like, oh, it's based off reality.
Yeah.
It is like he is fantasizing historical context in a way that's super interesting and metaphorical for us to consume in this modern day. And he's got all of these little nuggets sprinkled throughout that show that you're like, oh, fuck. Like the War of the Five Kings or whatever was really the War of the Roses.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy shit, this dude's like figured it the fuck out.
He copied and pasted stuff that was going around Europe and the Middle East for ages and just gave it new names and dragons.
Yeah, he just added ice zombies and dragons and retold history, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, holy shit, he's like, it's funny that he hasn't finished the last book because we should know how it ends based off of the historical context. But maybe that's why he has it, because he's like, I don't know how to fucking do this anymore. I don't know if you got into the books.
Especially when, Hollywood comes calling and they obviously they took that show their own direction by the end there. It's, how do you compete with that?
Yeah. And that's like with the way that media has transpired over there at HBO, like they leaned into the fucking dragon shit super hard. That show ended horribly. Everyone hated the way that it ultimately came out.
Casual viewers did.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what people that were like into the books thought about it.
Yeah. I remember I came back from Afghanistan and my buddy was like, dude, you have to watch this. And like the first 3 episodes or something like that, like they were coming out while I was like in.
It's like 2010, 11, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like as I was coming back from Helmand, and
back then you couldn't just access HBO while you were overseas.
No. Yeah. And it was like, I don't know, it felt divine to come home and watch this story where this family of Starks, whose sigil is the dire wolf, finds puppies of wolves. I was like, oh my God, like, did this guy write this for me? Did he mean for me to find this? This is the coolest thing. Like it felt fucking blessed.
Yeah.
To put it in a certain way. It was really interesting. And I became absolutely obsessed with it. And
the Starks are the good guys. That's the good news.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
for the most part.
Again, areas of gray,
yeah,
good and bad, but yeah, for the most part there.
Or at least we perceive them as the good guys.
Yeah. Fucking shades of gray, man. But you're supporting the king that's like a former usurper.
Yeah.
But that's the way that history is, man. That's ultimately like the way that we go. And, you go into, us and invading in Iraq, and we're like, hey, we're the fucking good guys going to do this. And then later you're like, wait, this is like shades of gray here. We're like, we're talking about.
We didn't really think this through.
Yeah.
Nostalgia is the most powerful drug on earth that everybody injects into their body, no matter what your intelligence level is, no matter what your socioeconomic factors you're going through. Nostalgia is the most powerful thing that we are addicted to as human beings in the world. We even like when I look back at like, oh, I lived, the 90s were awesome. Well, it's because I was a child and I didn't have to pay taxes and I didn't give a shit about the Oklahoma City bombing or Waco or frickin' Columbine. I was actually those kids' age, but like those things didn't bother me because I was young and all I cared about was my toys and getting my first car and playing baseball, right? Like the 90s were just as fucked up as any time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, our economy was in a good place, but other than that, like we have this tendency to think that people in a certain time frame had it right or had it better than we do now, which is bonkers. The world has always been a fucked up place with fucked up things happening. It just especially as Americans, we don't think it should happen to us, but it's happening to everybody all over the world constantly.
Yeah.
We're not special.
You look at, we're just aware of all of this different stuff that's happening versus the 80s and 90s. You're watching the news feed. Before that,
they tell you what to be concerned about.
You're consuming the newspaper, and that like clickbait headline thing really started back with newspaper media, right? And
there was no time where newspaper media was truly, we act like there was a time where it was true. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we act like there was a time when there was some sort of integrity that came along with it. No, they were always owned by big business people that had an angle.
Yeah. And again, like pieces into pieces into pieces. The reason that, you could tie this back to the making marijuana, THC, illegal, if you wanted to, with the reason that we had such a thing against hemp and made that into a certain drug categorization was because it was throwing the paper timber industry into a loop because it was so easy to produce goods with hemp that it was cutting into the profits of the timber and paper industry and again the newspaper industry. So they're like, lobbying to get rid of that, and you're like, oh fuck, all that's tied together.
It's why people in this country, we're gonna take a plane from San Antonio to Dallas, which is a 5-hour drive, instead of taking a train. It's why our train infrastructure here is shit compared to other parts of the world, because the airline industry had the power at a certain point to lobby and prioritize their mode of transportation. So we never invested in, kind of a railway system in this country. Even where it's common on the East Coast, it's nowhere near on the par of certain parts of Asia and Europe.
Yeah, that's one thing we have to get rid of in Washington and within our political systems, like the capabilities to lobby. Like that is a corporatism that needs to be removed from our government.
I just suspect it's in our DNA at this point. How do you stop that?
Well, I mean, it's the same way that you stop politicians from being able to insider trade, which happens all the time.
Yeah.
Which drives me nuts. And their capability, like, as long as you report what you're doing from a stock market perspective within 45 days, I think it is, you can do whatever you want. Even though you have all this insider information as to how the market is going to move because you're voting a certain way. But no, that's totally fine. It's totally fine for our politicians to do that because they're reporting it within 45 days. Do you know how much the market shifts within 45 days?
Within 48 hours.
Do you know how many trades politicians are doing, buying and selling within that time period, to where things are moving dramatically and they're making tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars? And we're just like, oh no, that's okay because, I guess it's in our DNA now. I guess that's just the way that we operate. Yeah, they rate me on taxes and they get to make a bunch of money off the stock market because they know what's going to happen. But I guess it's just in our DNA now.
We have to be willing as voters to call that. And there are those on both sides of the aisle. There are those candidates that pop up and they're adamant about shutting that system down, and they just never get the traction.
No, because too many people are going to lose too much money. I think that's exactly why Elon gets all this hate now, is because the people that are losing a bunch of money within this are causing enough stink to where they're going on media tirades to pin this guy as a horrible person and a dumb person.
Well, he's certainly not dumb.
No, I don't know how you can say that. And but because a whole bunch of people are losing money and not getting money anymore, there's an information campaign to, get this guy to say that he's dumb and that he's doing horrible things. It's like, it's really hard to wrap your head around it when you just think like, this guy's he's cutting waste. Like if you go back and I was a fan of Elon way before this Trump administration, because he's very methodical in the way that he goes about business and the principles that he lives by. Like it's in his biography with how he conducts himself within his businesses when it comes to everything from Tesla to SpaceX. And what he's doing now within Doge, and why I think Trump asked him to come and do this position, is because he makes profitable businesses. He cuts everything that is not required, almost so much so. And he says, he's like, if you're not adding in 10% back into process, then you're not cutting enough. And so when you hear that and like look at what he's done with his previous businesses, how he's just doing that in its totality from a much larger scope now, to where he's like, he's made it work before. This stuff takes time. Building assembly lines takes a ton of time. We just want everything. Like I don't even know if we've hit 100 days within this new administration. Yeah, we're probably like just over it now. But like, that's not a lot of time.
No, but in our lifetime, our expectations of, we want stuff too fast in everything we do.
Why do you think that is? Why aren't we patient anymore?
Oh, I would imagine the internet definitely has not helped it. But I would even imagine like post World War II, the standard of living in America became so good that we don't know any better at this point. We think it's just always been this way and that things will always be nice. So we come up against some adversity and we don't know how to handle it because we can't put ourselves in our grandparents' shoes who grew up in the Great Depression, you know? Yeah. And, you know, they weren't phased throughout their life because their life started out shit because of the economic issues of the day.
Yeah.
It only went up for them, where we've hit such a peak of, you know, how good things are. When things go down a little bit, we don't know how to handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point, man. I sit and meditate on where things are going at this point with our attention spans being as short as they are. And God, we fucking bounced around to a million different things already. It affects us to the point
because we're consuming so much information. We also want to verbalize everything we're consuming.
Yeah, I was watching, and it's weird how your brain picks up on this, right? Like I was watching the James Bond Skyfall movie, and I saw something. It was like, oh, this is the best James Bond movie, and I just remembered.
Is that a Daniel Craig one?
Yeah. It's the one where M dies at the end.
Okay.
And for some reason, my brain started ticking how quick they were making their cuts in this movie, and I was, my brain just picked up on it instinctually, and I started watching. I was like, and I just started counting. I was like, 1, 2, cut, 1, 2. Cut, 1. Almost every single scene in that movie is like 2 seconds on the dot. Like you can start counting it like a metronome, where they want to like make a stronger point. I think the longest scene that I counted was the sex scene in the shower.
But people will still stay glued to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you ever like want to watch a movie that like really tees up how to keep your attention well, that's a really good one to watch. And you'll see how they construct a video, keeping you tuned in, not even through what's on screen, but just how quick it's changing in order to keep your attention. And you think about like that effect, like what people have our brains locked down to a T, and they know how to keep our attention. That's why I harp on some of the social media teams sometimes. Like, there's no fucking hook.
Yeah.
The first 2 seconds are boring. Those are the most important 2 seconds of the entire thing that you're trying to make. Like, fix this.
Tarantino can get away with that. You can't when you're pumping out stuff for social media.
Right. I think Tarantino can get away with that because of his dialogue.
Yeah.
When you have really good locked in dialogue, it doesn't necessarily matter because your brain's attention is going to a different way. I think that's all. So why people don't have an issue listening to podcasts for 2 hours, because good dialogue is one of those things that's irrefutable to the human brain as well. It also makes me think of like Guy Ritchie's a master of dialogue, right? The best things about his movies, even those early ones from Snatch, but you can tell when Guy Ritchie like is really in the writer's room and like when the script comes out of his brain versus he's done a couple other movies that are more like action heavy.
And he just like the
visual.
director.
Yeah. The King Arthur movie, which was, it did not do well in the box office. It did not do well with the critics.
That's the one that came out in what, like 2004 or 5, something like that? Or is that a more recent one?
I think it was a little bit more recent than that.
Okay.
Charlie Hunnam, the guy from Sons of Anarchy, is in that, plays Arthur. There's a couple, the round table scenes. Like you think about Tarantino, you think about Guy Ritchie, there's a couple of those round table scenes where you're following the string of dialogue that's so engaging with the way it's presented. You're having to pay so much attention to what's being said that you don't even necessarily need to be dramatically involved with what's on screen from a visual perspective, because your brain is really enjoying the pacing of keeping up with what's being said through the dialogue. And I think that goes a long way to, again, kind of like talk about us as our collective conscious and our society here, as how we love to consume media, engagements, history from this. I've got to have my attention span drawn into this. I've got to love what I'm consuming here, part from a perspective of how your brain is adapting to what's being said and watched, and then also getting a grasp on how we learn well. You know, like it takes a lot. Like how many people, like you have to do a bunch of research for these videos that you're working on.
And I have to keep it simple. I don't get to put everything I've researched into the final product because of people's attention spans.
Right. And you probably aren't doing too much research through a book.
Nope. I have to consume it all. I you know, and in all honesty, and I don't think it's a bad way to do. Well, a lot of these topics I've already had a really good base knowledge of. But yeah, as we get more into these, you know, I know about these topics, but I need to do heavy research. I will start with Wikipedia. I'll get the basics from Wikipedia, and then I start going to all the different sources to really start getting everything I need to piece it together. But it's primarily done online.
And when you're presenting this stuff, are you using a certain amount of dialogue? I saw something that it was like most of America reads at like a 4th grade level, or like prefers to read at a 4th grade level. And
our vocabulary has decreased significantly in the last 50 years.
Which is so unfortunate. And sometimes I feel like, man, am I using really basic words now? Because there was like I saw an interesting video of how Trump speaks now versus how he used to speak. And I think he definitely someone along the way was like, if you present your information from a 3rd or a 4th grade level, a lot more of the public will resonate with a lot more of the American public.
That's a big reason why he has had the victories that he has. Is that's like, how else does a guy from Manhattan that has a golden toilet, how has middle America embraced him so much? He speaks at their level. He doesn't come off condescending like other politicians tend to do.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that is a human study in and of itself, is super interesting, because we now have access to so much information and the ability to fact check. We're more interested in leadership that feels like on our level, instead of, oh, that guy speaks really fancy, so he must
be smart,
super educated, right? Which was probably the way it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I think the last president we had that was like truly, like, I guess you would say traditionally articulate was probably Obama. Biden didn't come off that way, and there's probably certain factors in that, age being one of them. And Trump obviously doesn't come off that way either. Bush never came off that way. That was always the running joke with him. Clinton, I think he was looked at as a kind of a blumpkin, but he was popular.
Why do you think Clinton was so popular?
I think, well, I'm not, you know me, I don't talk politics, but he was a Southern Democrat, which especially at that time, that still had a lot of weight. A white Southern Democrat. And he was the first youthful president we had in years, right? He was the first baby boomer to be elected president. That was the first time like the significant portion of the population got their guy in, with Bush 41 and Reagan and Carter. These were all like the old generation. They've been running the show. I think the boomers were ready to have their people in power at that point. And then, again, the Democratic Party, if they embraced more of their white Southern politicians, I think they'd be winning more national elections. They've veered away from that in the last 20 years. But those guys are people that probably voted for Trump this time around might have voted Democrat if they had someone they could relate to. And, at the end of the day, white people make up the majority of the country. Yeah. And,
going back to, like this good versus evil shades of gray, like you start looking back at like the personal lives of all these presidents, and like I've been doing I like looked into all the JFK stuff that got released.
Oh yeah,
and all that. Nothing.
It
really
didn't give much, right?
I mean, I don't think you're able to come to any conclusive conclusions based on these 70,000 or whatever it was documents that was released. It kind of feels like a little bit of a carrot on a stick for these things, but like JFK was doing all sorts of like womanizing, like the rumors as far as
I think he was directly quoted as saying, "If I don't get a strange piece of ass every day, I get a migraine." Like
really?
Yeah, he couldn't. He just could. And back then too, right? Like nobody pried it. The whole prying into the president's personal lives didn't really start happening until like the Nixon era. That's when the media kind of started overstepping those boundaries. Before that, the media, like everybody knew in DC, the journalists, everyone knew, but they just didn't talk about that back then. Like, that's what he wants to do. He wants to fuck other women. We'll let him.
Well, it's funny because the American perception of him at the time was that it was this American golden family,
I mean, and he did. He came from like the ultimate American, aristocratic family.
Yeah.
And they were all athletic and highly educated and very motivated.
All right. So jumping back in, and it kind of coming full circle with Cuba, I guess, too. So the JFK involvement in the Bay of Pigs,
catastrophe.
A catastrophe. There's a lot of theory as to that being the biggest reason as to why he could potentially have been a victim to an assassination. But which
the last president that was assassinated was William McKinley, who was also dealing with Cuba.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, he was the one that oversaw the Spanish-American War.
Yeah.
And then the next president that gets assassinated after that is coming out of the Bay of Pigs and Cuban involvement.
So what was this? Do you remember the story behind McKinley's?
Well, it was a crazy person.
Yeah.
There was
no like direct ties.
Nah, there's
maybe.
Maybe. I think the guy was like an anarchist. And people forget anarchism was like kind of a big movement back then across the world. And they would do crazy shit. Like they just assassinate political leaders just for the fuck of it. So that has less to do probably with the Cuba thing than it does somebody just wanting to make a weird statement.
Yeah. Yeah. But so you go like going back in time to the Bay of Pigs, which was a plan that was in place originally in the late 50s, right? So
he inherited that from Eisenhower.
Eisenhower was still in office. And so obviously, we've been talking about the strategic importance and value of Cuba throughout this whole entire podcast, but basically there's a plan, and I believe that so it's a group of individuals, basically some people who had left Cuba combined with some CIA assets I believe they trained in Guatemala. It's Brigade 2506. Is that right?
I'm not super knowledgeable about anything on the ground level with that.
Okay. But so yeah, basically the CIA trained a group of guys, some of them previously from Cuba, who were down for the cause. Central America, I know that at least they trained in Central America, came back. The Bay of Pigs comes. I don't think that JFK kind of like when you go back and like you look at it, also like JFK is a war veteran who
legit, and a lot of it was amplified by his daddy, but legitimately was a badass.
Yeah, he saw some shit
Yeah.
in World War II. PT 109,
Yep.
I think, is the book that's about his time.
And that's not to derail this, but that is a textbook of how to build it's basically what Teddy Roosevelt did. He became a national hero from this book, then movie that spurned his political career. You know, it's kind of that, you know, become a war celebrity and use that as a way to get into office, high office.
Yeah. And he seems hesitant to jump into these plans. Also, you got to assume this is a guy. Obviously, the plan for the Bay of Pigs was started when Eisenhower was office, but this is also a president that has Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech in his head, and he's looking at the global landscape of how things are evolving.
And Kennedy was on board with that.
Yes, yeah. Seen as a dude who his rise to power and the influence that all these other entities and corporate war machines were having over everything, you can tell he's real resistance to jump into any type of conflict, which obviously there needed to be some balance within that when it comes to executing plans that have been put in place before you were in office. The CIA in the 50s is insane, like what they were doing.
Yeah, and they were pretty fresh, but they still were operating under their OSS ways, where they were like these renegades
who were doing whatever the fuck they wanted, and they didn't have a problem with profiting on what they were doing. Like, I'm working on did a historical video on the context of the CIA involvement in Guatemala. Have you delved into this at all?
No, not really. I mean, I know basics.
Okay, I'll just give you the brief rundown. But basically, the United Fruit Company, which later became Chiquita Banana.
Yeah.
Alan Dulles, director of the CIA, his brother is on the board of the United Fruit Company, which is running. They have plantations all over Guatemala. Basically, the leadership, the socialist communist leader that's in power in Guatemala at the time, starts basically like, hey, we're going to give this land back to the people, which sounds nice in theory, but where
not when the U.S. is invested in it.
Not when the U.S. is invested in whether or not that's going back to the people.
Excuse me. Bless thee.
There's a lot more investigation and like I'm saying with this puzzle with history about whether or not we can actually even get that information at this point. But so the coup that happened in Guatemala in the, I believe it was 54, was orchestrated by the CIA, and they basically through propaganda, radio, and a group of 640 people split it up into 4 different groups that, like, when you're like, I don't know how the fuck they were able to do this, but they get their, they do the coup, they get their guy in power. The profits for the Dulles family are put in place and continued until later, when the guy that they put in power ends up just whacking anybody that he's saying. He just gross abuses of power. And he was saying, like, he was basically murdering anybody who is a communist, which whether that's the case, or he was just killing anybody that, it's like,
The
he's a commie. Boom.
The
He's
communists
a commie.
were a threat to the bottom line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was probably much more than that, to where, people are just, he's just murdering whoever he wants to kill, saying they're a communist, right? So it's hard to say. History is gray.
Now, again, not to derail this, there is a very traceable history of that in the United States, of that being used as an excuse to go after calling anybody a communist you can.
Yeah. So the CIA is doing, they're just cooing it up in the 50s. Have this plan to do a coup in Cuba. Seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Seems like a good idea.
Let's get back involved with Cuba.
And
and we forget, though, this wasn't the full-fledged communist Castro Cuba as we know today. They were still, historically aligned with American politics and business at this time.
yeah,
Well, this is the beginnings. This is when Castro's first in power, but you still had obviously a lot of Cubans who liked the relationship they had with the United States the past 60 years.
yeah. So 62, right? Bay of Pigs, if
I think so, yeah.
remember correctly.
So 61 or 62.
Yeah. These guys go down, train in Central America, come back, day of, we're set to jet, right? Kennedy pulls air support
Very important.
at the last minute. And basically the plan for this whole mission was based upon this air support. There's not a lot of people on the ground. The way that this is successful, and you got to remember, this is coming off the back of World War II, when we understood the strategic importance of air power. You can accomplish a lot if you have the correct amount of air support. It is the most valuable asset. And we know this. You have to assume that Kennedy knows what he's doing by doing this. The failed Bay of Pigs becomes an embarrassment to America.
To his administration.
And really sets the stage for a CIA versus JFK stage. The Cuban Missile Crisis happens 18 months later, which wouldn't have happened had we had a successful Bay of Pigs.
He handled that as good as you can, but people forget he's the whole reason that freaking thing happened.
Yeah.
That's why he was campaigning in Texas in 63 when he got shot. People forget. That was such a catastrophe. He was very much at risk of being the first Democrat in 100 years to lose the state of Texas, because Texas was pretty hard blue, and he had to start campaigning in Texas, which was usually a lock for a Democrat, because it was very unpopular what had gone down during the early parts of his administration.
Yeah. So, yeah, Cuba had been doing what Cuba does, and it has been a fucking thorn in our ass for a long time, very long time.
Yeah. I think I'm to Trump's credit, opening trade back. I don't know where that's at now, but even or was that an Obama thing? Opening trade back up with Cuba, or limited trade. Those are good steps.
Yeah.
But I don't remember if that was an Obama or a Trump thing.
I still don't think that we can really I don't even think you can go, you need some type of student visa exception.
It's not like it's not like it's a free for all by any means. Yeah. It's not like our friends in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing with the Spanish-American War. We did actually have Cuba as a territory for, I think it maybe lasted not even a decade. But Cuba was a U.S. territory temporarily, and then we rightfully handed it back to the Cuban people. But that's how we got Puerto Rico, the Philippines, which only truly went back to pure Filipino control maybe 30 years ago, and Guam all came from the Spanish-American War. And the Spanish military was such on its last leg at that point, they basically just handed those things over to us.
Didn't the Japanese retake Guam, though?
During World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, oh, man. I don't know if this would be appropriate for this show, but one of the coolest Marine Corps stories ever happened during Guam. The Japanese took that island and they did what the Japanese did. They were very violent to the locals. There was a 13-year-old boy named, I believe his name is Ben Blas. He was a Chamorro local Guam kid. And when the Marines showed up on the other side of the island, this little 13-year-old boy linked up with the Marines and basically guided the Marines over and gave them all the intel on what the Japanese were up to. Ben Blas, the war is over. Ben Blas commissioned in the United States Marine Corps and ended up had an illustrious career as a Marine. And one of the final touches of his career was he became the commander of 3rd Marine Division, the very division that liberated Guam during World War II.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, really cool story.
Huh.
Yeah.
Ben Blas.
And then after he retired from the Marine Corps, he became like the congressional representative for Guam.
Oh.
Or I don't know if they call them delegates or representatives. They don't have the same power as a congressman.
Yeah. And then decades later, we've got another politician who's saying that if we continue to put the military presence that we have on Guam, it'll tip over.
He'll tip over, yeah. Hank Johnson from Georgia. I don't remember what. I remember that was like 2008. That was like the early period of where you were really seeing politicians say dumb stuff that before was just kind of kept in house, but now because of the internet, it's gonna live forever. It can ruin political careers.
Dude, that was a real eye opener for me. As you say, it was in 2008. So I was in Guam in 2008.
On your way overseas or on the way back?
Yeah. So I did that was the 15th MU. So we did on the USS Pearl Harbor. I got to float into Pearl Harbor on the USS Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Which was one of the coolest American moments I've ever had in my life. And then we did, I think we did Guam on the way back, actually. So I did
Ag washdowns.
Yeah. Hawaii, basically traversed the Pacific, sat in Kuwait for some reason. We didn't go. We were in Kuwait for 3 weeks, and the fucking OIF was raging, and they were like, "You're
2008
not going."
was when Iraq was kind of starting to die down, right?
Die down.
Yeah.
And so I mean that was the whole reason why I thought we were going over there and just sat in Kuwait. Didn't end up going.
I got the worst sunburn of my life in Guam. Fell asleep. The sun fell asleep. You know how you'd sleep next to the vehicle. The sun popped over, and I woke up, and I was charged.
I love Guam. I had a ton of fun there. But so I'm back, and we're in Guam. And I remember seeing that, and that was when I was in the Marine Corps for a year or so at that point, and I remember seeing that, and I was like, this guy's a politician. Like that was like the first true moment when like the rose-covered glasses like really came off.
Oh, the romanticism of military service.
Military service, of government, of our own politicians. When I was like, I was a knuckle-dragging grunt at that time.
But you were idealistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, shit, the world is not the way I thought it was.
Yeah. Well, they always say that the biggest pessimists were once idealists. Like you truly believed. And when things start crumbling is when you become a pessimist.
Yeah.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah. Is there a specific instance you can really think of that?
Yeah, I think that? I never did Afghanistan, but the Iraq experience specifically, and it didn't happen. It wasn't like a flip of a switch. It took like years for it to kind of morph into what it became, where I had to admit openly, and like, okay, it was bullshit. We bought into some bullshit and didn't need to go down the way it did. And I'm not ashamed, but that should have never happened.
Yeah. The documentary that you put together, I think the best performing video that Black Rifle Coffee had last year was the Warpigs documentary that you spearheaded. I don't think a lot of people know that your personal relationship to us, and you can tell by
I was purely behind the camera on that one.
Yeah. But the story behind the story with that one was that Jack knew all these guys, and really spurred when we were sitting around to talk about what we would do last year. The 20-year anniversary of Fallujah was one of those things that, you know, we thought was really important to us, and that was something that we should really feature as a company. And you had a, you know, intricate knowledge of that through some of these guys that I believe they were right below you, right? Is that correct on the...
I was peers with a lot. No, I was, I came into boot camp and SOI and with a lot of the people. I probably personally served with about half the guys, or probably 2/3 of the guys interviewed in that series. I did my first deployment with them, and then I punched out to another company, and then they went and did Fallujah. So it was a weird thing. It's like I know them on a very good personal level. We had done war together, but I was removed enough from the Fallujah thing, but also familiar enough to where I could approach it to them. Like they were comfortable and familiar with me as we served together way, but also I wasn't so personally connected to being in Fallujah because I didn't do it with them that I could approach it objectively as well.
Right. And what was that from your perspective that you saw within this group of Marines who were in LAR that impacted that story 20 years later?
I think it was not only we were making the story we needed to for them and for the documentary and for the company. I think it was also a growing experience for me because I got back from my deployment right after they got back from Fallujah. We reunited. We spent the last year in the Marine Corps together. We had talked about things. I'd heard things that had happened over there over the years. I knew the basics of, you know, a couple of these guys who got killed, who I knew one of them very well. I knew that stuff, but it wasn't until 20 years later that these guys were able to do it, you know, and you got to understand, these guys got out, the majority of them got out of the Marine Corps like from 2005 to 2007. And they just went back to life, and they didn't talk about it, and they just went on with life. So I think 20 years later for them, they were able to approach it where it still was relatively fresh in their memory, and they could recall what was happening, and but they had the maturity to do it in a articulate way, and they had the maturity to not go into it with the kind of a lot of them after 20 years they've come to peace with what it was and what happened, but it was also something where they were bringing up memories that they had suppressed in a lot of ways, and you saw it come out on camera. And for me, there was a couple of these guys that I've known since boot camp, and we've stayed in touch over the years. It was an emotional experience for me behind the camera, watching them recount this truly in a vulnerable way for the first time in 20 years. They haven't talked to their wives about this, certainly not their kids. You know, nobody. Ed, my dear friend Ed Lonicky was one of the guys we interviewed in that, and he was one of the wilder guys. And he said, "Oh man, I had like my kids' coaches coming up to me, just being like, 'Oh, dude, I had no idea.'" You know, he's a real Southern boy, yeah. Georgia boy. He's like, "I didn't know you did that, Ed. That's nuts, man." Yeah, he like, and it happened. Or it's not like Ed recommended the freaking doc to them. They saw it. Somebody shared it, and yeah, they saw this guy in their community they'd always known as this good dad, and he's done very well for himself and his business. They just thought he was just he is a local pillar of the community, but Ed did some shit in his youth. Yeah. But also we filmed this over basically and essentially over 3 locations in 4 days. And so we had to bulk get these guys together to get these interviews. There was 26 interviews that we did. So like the Pendleton one, we interviewed, I think, 16, 17, 18 dudes in a 48-hour period. And so these guys got to not only tell their story finally, they got to be around each other doing it. Yeah. Which was super powerful. Because, again, these guys went on with life. And, you know, you see guys you serve with onesie, twosie, but to have a whole group of dudes come together was really, really powerful.
Yeah. It was interesting from my perspective because I interacted with LAR or light armored reconnaissance quite a bit when, you know, both as a scout sniper and as a
Oh, I'm sure they dropped you off in places and stuff like that. Yeah.
100%.
They're a great. They are, in my opinion, the Marine Corps' utility tool.
Yeah.
And yes, it's technically infantry, but they dip their hands in a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and it was funny because I got a unique impression from the LAR guys right away, as these guys who spend so much time together. They live in this tank essentially, right? They're fucking weird, but like weird in a way that you feel like you won't really ever be able to fit in with them, because these guys have spent so much time together in this confined area. And it's LAR was this thing that was it was in this weird middle ground of the infantry, is that it was
not pure infantry, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was like, it was kind of like it was reconnaissance, but it was grunt. So you've got like weird MOSs coming together, and they're supporting, different elements. And I believe, are they a regimental level asset?
No, it's all battalion report straight to division.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're just like in this really unique designation within the infantry, which means that they're kind of all over the place, and because of their mobility, but these guys just live in this shell, and they have to get super good at their jobs, because it's not like
a normal infantry unit structure. A squad of 12, you're operating on 4-man teams pretty much.
And you have, like, from the weaponry that you have to be able to operate, from the tactics that you have to be able to employ, both from a dismounted and mounted perspective, and then also the capabilities to be able to maintain that vehicle as well. You have to have,
the
like,
mechanic is way more important than any O3 in LAR. The mechanic is the heart of that battalion, of that unit.
Yeah. And so it creates this super interesting, unique dynamic that ends up bleeding into these personalities. And then all of a sudden you add Fallujah on top of that. And
those things aren't built for urban warfare.
No. So you're kind of like this fucking cat out of water to begin with. And so that unique relationship that's already there before you're thrust into combat, and then you layer in Fallujah on top of that, which for me, I got in 2007. And so, prior to me going in, I'm reading as much Fallujah literature as I possibly can get my hands on. And that was really the kind of groundwork for what I was trying to set myself up for, to manage expectations and what I could like come to expect, because you try and not go into it from a completely like ignorant standpoint, right? You want to know, like, you're like, this is going to be so difficult.
I'm sure some of your seniors were veterans too, because you were in 5th Marine, so I'm sure some of your seniors were Fallujah veterans.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, my head drill instructor was an LAR guy.
Oh really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if I knew him.
Yeah. And so I was getting those stories in boot camp, right? And he had, you get these stories. I'm like, coming in during the early years of the GWAT, you're like, oh fuck, like this is it. This is purposeful. This is what I wanted to get.
And and you knew at that point, well, this is going to be going on for a while. I'm not missing out on anything.
Yeah. There was no illusions about what I thought would kind of be happening in the next 4 years of my career. Right. But because of, let's say, the magnetism of being in an LAR vehicle, you get a lot of attention from the enemy when you're driving around in those things.
And at that time, those turrets were hydraulic, so it's just now they're electric because they're quieter, but yeah, they stood out.
And what was your role within LAR?
My first the deployment I saw the most combat on, I was a driver. I was basically the only person on the vehicle that didn't have his hands on his weapon in the fight. I had to keep that vehicle straight and allow everybody else to do the shooting. So, and you're just down there and all you have is portholes. So, these nighttime firefights, you just see nothing but tracers in this small field of vision you have. You just see tracers going everywhere and everything like that. And you just have to trust the people in your vehicle had the field of fire that they needed to make sure an RPG wasn't going to slam into the side of your vehicle.
And I'm asking you this question, kind of knowing part of it. This was your first deployment?
Yeah, I was fresh out of SOI. We basically graduated from SOI and went straight to the airport and got on a Delta flight to Kuwait. I landed in Kuwait like 10 days. People always ask, like, were you scared? It's like, I was so brand new. I didn't know what feeling I was supposed to have. It might as well have been a training exercise for me.
I was more scared of my seniors than I was
I didn't know
of the
anybody. I
combat.
had a corporal and a sergeant on that vehicle, and all the scouts in the back were boots like me. I didn't even know the name of like anybody outside of my vehicle until like things had died down after the 4 weeks into the invasion, and like we were able to walk and meet other people from other platoons and stuff. I was in a bubble.
Yeah. And break down for me, typically how many people are in those things, the roles of them, and like what's that structure?
Yeah, I think it's still generally the same today. I'm sure there's been some changes, structural changes, but you have four LAV 25s to a standard LAV platoon. And so basically on the 0311 side, you have a chief scout. It's usually a sergeant, and they're overseeing 4 scout teams. And those scout teams can operate as 4-man teams very autonomously. It's not like a squad. It's not structured like a traditional infantry squad. That chief scout is just overseeing 4 teams that can be very distant from each other. Each vehicle carries it says they can carry 4, but it's, typically safely you're carrying 3 scouts, 4 sometimes. Like a normal infantry platoon, you always have one corpsman, so a corpsman will make up one of those teams. You have those mechanics. Every platoon has a mechanic. Those mechanics don't stay in the vehicle and just focus on fixing the vehicle. They're out there with O3s, kicking in doors and everything like that. And then on every vehicle has 3 0313s, crewmen. You have the driver, which is typically the newest, Buddhist, as we would say in the Marine Corps.
Which is funny that you tee up the boot to drive. You'd think that would be like the super salty guy that you're like, you can trust under the, like, you think about some boot getting into combat for the first time, getting shot at, and he's the one ultimately responsible for where the thing that transports anybody go. But that's also kind of the Marine Corps in a nutshell when I think about it.
Gil Juarez, the guy who was the company commander, he was actually my company commander on that first deployment, and then he commanded that company in Fallujah as well. I love that guy because he has very out of the box thinking about the way a LAR unit should operate and what the role should be, and he that's his point as well, that the driver shouldn't be the newest guy.
Yeah.
And then you have a gunner, which is typically
out of the box thinking.
Yeah. You have a gunner who operates that main gun in the coax, which is a 240, and then you have the vehicle commander who's typically he's always standing up, always mounted, standing on a seat, and he's got 360 view, and he's got a 240 up there, and they always have their rifles right there with them as well, and then so four LAV 25s to a LAV platoon, 3 platoon at that time, 3 platoons. And a headquarters platoon that there's all sorts of LAV variants. There's the C square, which it's all radios. It's where, the XO and first sergeant are in. You have, back then I was the last person to watch a LAV fire a Gatling gun in combat. We had not Gatling gun. It was the air defense. We had air defense LAVs, and it was like essentially like a Gatling thing. So I got to watch one of those in action.
The anti-air?
Yeah. It was they discontinued it like right after the invasion of Iraq, but
like the things that were on the ships?
Yeah. They carved out an LAV hole and put anti-air capabilities on LAVs.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, they've been extinct for over 20 years now, but they were a thing back then.
No shit.
Yeah, they had the AT4. They had, I'm sorry, we had 0350. There was a weapon. Every battalion had a weapons company too. So there was a AT variant that was a 0352 in the turret, operating all the anti-tank missiles and then.
So wait, are you talking about the tow missile?
Yeah, the tow missile. There was also tow capabilities mounted to the LAV as well, and you'd have an 0352 operating that system in there.
And that was on a different, typically, okay, so we got the what's in the one specific LAR, but now are you talking about a group of LAR vehicles that roll out together?
At the battalion level, there's always a weapons company, and they have the mortar variant, the AT variant, and then at that time, the anti-air variants.
And that's all vehicle mounted.
Yep. Those mortarmen, the mortar is permanently, it's in the LAV. You do everything. You shoot all the mortars out of the LAV.
I mean, this gets fucking 18-year-old Logan super excited when I start thinking about all these capabilities. So you think about that from a capability standpoint, having all of that vehicle mounted, that's an incredible capability to roll into the battlefield with.
Yep.
And then you get into Fallujah and you're dismounting going from house to house.
Yeah, those scouts probably were dismounted a significant amount of the time, having to clear houses. And they would position the vehicles in a way where the scouts would come down through the top. They'd do everything from the rooftop. They'd go rooftop to rooftop, and they'd push the enemy down. So the enemy either is going to die in that house or they're going to run out of the front door trying to escape the Marines. Well, once they get into the street, there's an LAV-25 with a 25 millimeter Bushmaster chain gun ready to mow them down.
Hot damn, dude.
Yeah. That famous photo and of the Marine dropping the grenade, that's Chris DeBlanc. He's been my tax guy for 6 years. But that's what they were doing. They were coming in for the rooftop, and they just toss grenades down until they felt it was safe enough to go down. And then, either there's dead people at the bottom, they're getting into a firefight, or there's nobody there.
So when this, how did the Warpigs documentary come about? What was the antithesis of that?
It started with when I first started my writing endeavors, and we were only 2-3 years out of the Marine Corps. I started asking those guys questions, and I started putting together little stories. So a lot of the stuff you'll see in this documentary, I've already kind of covered in writing before for various publications. But the documentary itself started with, it was a call to action from, Matt at that time. We need to think of starting to do a Fallujah piece. And I was like, I got this. I know exactly what story we're doing. And the point of the Warpig documentary was not to say that these were the best of the best in Fallujah, or these guys were any more important than any other unit. But what series do we really value as consumer of war media, right? Band of Brothers. I wanted to do a story about one unit that kind of tells the story of the bigger picture, but through the lens of one unit, where the viewer, it's not just a guy from this Army battalion and a guy from this Marine battalion and a tanker and someone in the air, and it's all big picture stuff. I want people to understand what Fallujah was for the guys in one unit, and that were, how they navigated that whole thing. And I obviously I knew who to call, and I called 3 people. One of them was my former roommate in the Marines, another guy named Dan Spencer. He's a lawyer out in LA now. He was in that unit, and one of the old platoon commanders that everybody respects. And I knew if these guys could get everybody on board, then we were able to make this. And that's what happened. Gil Juarez, the company commander of that unit, was still in the Marine Corps at that time. And he's an older fella, and he was kind of on the fence about doing it. And luckily, Paul, one of his old platoon commanders, was kind of like, this will be a quality project. These guys have all known me. They've seen my work throughout the years. but they've mainly seen me like with the blow up doll and like the silly videos with Black Rifle. I don't think a lot of them understood I was starting to move a little more behind the scenes and doing these kinds of deeper pieces. So, but man, they all got on board, and man, I was really surprised how open everybody was. And there is something about a camera and lights being on you where we only had two, Ryan Fitting and Ben Pennington and myself were the only guys in that room. We were behind the camera. And once we started asking questions, those guys all opened up. And for the most part, I just had to tee them up very simply. They did the rest on their own. Yeah. It's like they had stuff they needed to get off their chest. And I don't think most of them went to therapy after the war.
Well, yeah, big surprise there. And I mean, how was the reception initially when you're presenting this to them as like, hey, 20 years, 2 decades, the gravity of that, was this something that these guys were super keen to sit down to delve into? Or
for the most part, they were all down. There were some people that were reluctant, and I don't blame them. It's not even for me. I've been on the camera for years now, playing these stupid, silly characters. But the one time I ever got like interviewed outside of a podcast, it was nerve-wracking. It's weird to be in that situation. And there were a couple of guys that were a little reluctant, but they came and did it because they knew their buddies were doing it, and they knew that maybe there's something to this. And everybody was just phenomenally open and great and vulnerable and honest, and couldn't have. And I'm lucky, right? With most of these guys, we already have had an established relationship for 20 years, so I think they had a level of trust with me that they may not have with obviously a stranger showing up and doing this. I was losing sleep leading up to the release of it, because after every presents we release, I look at the numbers. I want to make sure I'm justifying my position in the company and that I'm doing a good job. This was so fucking personal. I didn't care what the numbers were going to be for Black Rifle. I was like, I can't be in a situation where I didn't do these guys justice. Like, this was so personal. And luckily they were, nobody's said anything bad about it.
Well, you can tell there's something in this that comes from the gravity of going back through a story, of reliving these experiences, of extreme brotherhood, extreme ups and downs in life. It's both the best and the worst parts of life when you're going through combat and you have to deal with, some of your best friends on the planet dying in front of you. Also, in conjunction with that, you're experiencing the extreme brotherhood that happens when you're saving each other's lives, when you're able to work together as a team to locate, destroy the enemy, and then come out of that and get back into your vehicle and have the confidence to go do that again and again and again in the confines of Fallujah, Iraq. And so, like you said, a lot of these guys probably didn't do the full deep dive, kind of digressing as to the gravity of what that situation held for them. But you can see this thing get unlocked as you watch this film. Man. And
it's because they had the opportunity to hang out with each other like the day before. A couple of those interviews, those guys were hungover, right? Because they've been
I would expect nothing less.
Partying the night before. It was before we started the interviews. These guys had already had a couple days of hanging out with each other, reminiscing, and I'm sure this happens when you get together with old Marine buddies. They mention something that happened that you haven't thought about in years, and you're like, "Oh, that did happen. Now I remember that." Yeah.
And when you get this thing together, which I think you edited in like a haste, as far as like
Ryan Fitting edited, I was there inserting my opinions on the story, but he spent extra hours at the office.
But it's what, an hour and 40 minutes long?
Hour and 44 minutes. And it's basically 3 seconds short of 145.
And
And it flows.
typically you could spend a year plus just on the editing side of a documentary that long. And I think you guys got it done like 3 months or something like that.
We shot our last interview at the Salt Lake office. 2 guys we couldn't get during principal, so we just flew them in. You know what I'm most proud of? Well, on the company side, what I'm most proud of, this is counting like air travel for like premieres and stuff. We did this for under $15,000. Yeah, our last interview was probably like September 12th, and then it was out by November 8th. So 2 months.
That's wild.
Yeah.
On the production side, that is wild. And what you have this quick turnaround. Do you have a rough screening with these guys before it goes live?
I actually put it up to a few of them. Quite a few of them, they just wanted to wait for the final product, and that was perfectly fine. I did show it to a couple because I needed to make sure we didn't get anything wrong. One of the guys who I served with, I spelt his last name wrong in the lower third, and I just didn't forgive myself for that. Yeah, I did show it to a couple. Paul Weber, who his interviews were very extensive in the final cut. He was one of the platoon commanders, and he retired out of he was one of the original like MARSOC officers. That's how he spent the rest of his Marine Corps career. I screened it with him, and I needed to make sure it was done right because a couple of things we talked about were pretty heavy shit.
Yeah.
And he talked about.
Inside of that group, what was the reaction to everything?
About 8 hours after its release, there was a mass email. I've been communicating with people during post through mass emails, like this is what to expect. This is where you can load your personal pictures, all that, yada yada yada. There was a mass email chain with pretty much everybody I interviewed. And that's when the emails started coming in, and they were all positive, and I was able to sleep that night.
Yeah.
No, like 6 or 7 dudes had given it praise, and I was like, okay, no one's thinking that I fucked this up. So
what about the reactions is like you're saying, the baseball coach or whatever coming up to the guy, but was there any family member or tertiary people that like kind of had this, oh my God, I didn't know sort of reaction to everything?
Yeah, I'm going to tread this. So the guy I knew the most in that, and we focused probably like 40 minutes of the 1 hour and 45-minute doc on one particular gnarly firefight these guys were in. I knew one of the guys pretty well that was killed in that one, and I've known his mother over the years. And I showed her a cut about 4 or 5 days before we released it, and she watched it with her brother, and she did not know, and she knew what happened to her, but not in the detail that we showed. And I warned her, like, this is gonna be very detailed about how he spent his final moments. And I got a video of her watching it during certain moments, and it was like really profound.
Yeah.
I was so scared. It wasn't putting that information out that was scary. It was just like, like we all are Gold Star parents, fucking everything, and wives and children, everything in this country. And we can talk about their sons however we want. We knew them in certain ways their parents didn't. We can tell stories of them being drunk assholes.
Yeah.
When they were at the barracks, but their parents knew them in a different way than we did. And it seemed like she was on board from the response I got from her. And yeah. Well,
20 years removed from, a tragic loss, and
those families never get over it, man.
No. And it's, we all know Gold Star mothers and stuff like that. It is not 20 years doesn't exist. It's something when you're talking about the
Your
loss of a
child's
son
life was cut short in their fucking prime.
and your relationship was cut short with them. You know, the thing that you raised, the thing that you brought into this world and saw take their first steps, and then all of a sudden they're gone from you in the worst way possible. But to have their memory featured by someone who really cares about them makes them live on in a way that maybe wasn't there before. And anytime that, I speak from some experiences I had with these Gold Star, like when they hear these stories about their children, it's better than the idea that they're forgotten or that no one cares anymore.
Yes. And that's the thing that I found out, that I was really scared because she didn't know I was making this until probably a month before it released. And that's when I called her and prepped her. I should have done it before, but I think there was some, I don't know. There was some sort of catharsis knowing that the public was going to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that fear, these things that we talk about are our perceptions of the military and the government. You talk about what it really comes down to, what it's like to exist in a combat environment. Like, it is true what they say when the only thing that matters is the men that you're in the foxhole with and the people that are to your left and to your right. And there exists a relationship that you don't know is possible until you're in those types of situations. And for a parent to know that someone has the same level of love for the thing that you love so much, it doesn't take away from any of the loss that's felt, but there is gravity in knowing that other people care as much as you do about this incredible human.
Yeah. And they did 20 years later. They still carried that person's memory in them. All of them. Yeah.
Which, man, I think, it's one of those things. Nobody's really going to care and forget when you're like, we have these, they're like, never forget, right? What does that mean? What does that mean for us to never forget?
At some point, it just becomes it becomes redundant to where people quit thinking about what that actually means.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's these things, and we have to look at this through the scope of how we never forget today in our day and age. And for many years, this was recounting stories through books and magazine articles, and the layers in which this can happen from a cathartic standpoint for the person that's still alive, but for these people that knew these individuals so well, when you think about the why behind service and the attribution of love. I think about this all the time. I don't know if you've ever had the question, I wear this, there's a t-shirt I have that's like, remember kids, don't trust your government. It's like, yeah. but you served. So what's the meaning behind that? Service is this intricate commitment towards other Americans, towards the other people that stand for something, that love a piece of fabric and the idea behind that piece of fabric just as much as you do. And when we talk about never forgetting, it is how we operate in this day and age to recount these stories in ways that are meaningful for us as the people that experience these things, but also in the day and age of our landscape of media. And the fact that if we like, how do we never forget? Well, it's this message that we feel like the American public should have a relationship to, that if the idea that we are one and we are united in our ethos of what we do.
The troops are kind of at the center of that. It's always been for the most part, a non-political thing. Everybody can get on board with the importance of our standing military and the people in it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not propaganda. It's the actual fabric of reality for what this stuff means. And Warpigs is that in a nutshell. It is what service actually looks like and transcends memory.
Yeah. And I'm glad. I think what I love personally the most about how it came out in the final product is thanks to a couple of these guys who they were like the nerdy guys in the company who brought at that time, people were just starting to affordably get cameras.
Yeah.
We had so much footage of them in the thick of it. And they also had a really legendarily great combat journalist named Scott Peterson attached to them, who got just incredible shots of them in action. But juxtaposing those pictures of them in their youth, and we have video of them at the barracks being wild and drunk and being kids, which they were, with them now as 38 to 50-year-old men talking about that time in their life with with years of experience under their belt, showing those two things collide, right? Their youthful, energetic little baby Marine attitudes with the family men and the pillars of the community they are today, and combining those two things.
Yeah, it's it's a time capsule, right? Like where we're at in our age is at this precipice of documentation that's never existed in the history of warfare. You look back at
we didn't have the GoPros on the helmet.
The point and shoot cameras. Journalists were embedded. Like if you think about Vietnam and some of these like media things that we have from from like Desert Storm, how that was presented to the public.
You had to have CNN there.
Yeah, it was these things, these journalistic outlets that were probably trying to present some perspective one way or the other. But when it's guys who are just like, we're going to get into some shit, and I know that, and because of the awareness of that, we're going to document this fucking craziness.
Yeah, let's remember 2005. It wasn't cool to do that back then. It wasn't cool to be documenting everything. That was still a period of time where it's just like having constant access to cameras just wasn't a thing. Your mind wasn't there. So for those guys to have the foresight to do that, oh man, the doc wouldn't have been the same if they hadn't have decided to carry video cameras for them to Fallujah 20 years prior.
Yeah.
And they were corpsmen. So unless there was like an immediate need for them, a lot of those corpsmen were getting out of the vehicles and hooking and jabbing. Don't get me wrong, but they tried to keep them inside the vehicles as much as possible, unless they were obviously their services were needed. So they could afford to break out the camera when they wanted to.
Yeah. But I think correct me if I'm wrong, it speaks to this understanding of the gravity going into something, of what is likely to happen when you're undertaking something like Fallujah, which can you kind of explain what it was like to go, like what was the mindset, what had happened prior to, all right, we're driving our LARs into this war zone.
Yeah. So from there, from the interviews I conducted, it was for that unit in particular, it was so fucking last second. They basically thought they were just going to go on a normal 31st Mu, sail around Asia type thing. And a couple of them, they'd seen what was going on in the news. There was 2 battles of Fallujah. The first one was gnarly within itself. A lot of Marines lost their lives. And basically they were given 3 days notice to pack their shit, get on this ship and sail over to Kuwait. Even when they got to Kuwait, they didn't know what the hell was going on. And then they were like, okay, now you're going up to Iraq. And then they got to Iraq, I think like September. And then they just started September, October. And then they just started conducting patrols. And then they were, this was the big picture stuff that was happening. They were getting, as Gil Juarez said in the doc, they were getting these Marines inoculated to what it was going to be like going into that city. So they'd slowly do these patrols closer and closer to the city. As the city built up, the civilians left. There were nothing but insurgents in that city by the end of it. And then it all, they didn't, I don't think, just from my interviews, I don't think most of those guys realized it was becoming real until maybe a couple weeks before.
Yeah. And
then they realized that it was good. They quickly realized that this was going to be a huge operation. And unlike, because I was there when we invaded Iraq, we had a Desert Storm mentality, I guess, where it's like, we got this, conventional force on conventional force and open terrain. We're coming out on top. Where I think most of those guys realized this was going to be different.
Yeah.
And I think one of them mentioned, they saw the amount they were bringing in the body bags because they were anticipating a lot of casualties.
Yeah. And the reality of close quarters combat with people who had pretty much, from the enemy standpoint, kind of like thrown in the towel as far as like the idea that they would make it out.
Oh, those guys knew they were jihadists. They were going to die for the cause in that city, for sure.
And you layer that on top of, all right, so we're going to conduct urban combat of clearing an area against an enemy that is...
They're hunkered in.
Just hunkered in and preparing to die. Who's like, okay, I'm going to sit in this room until people come to try and kill me, and I'm going to take as many of them out as possible.
And that's precisely what they were dealing with.
And you're doing that over and over and over again.
Yeah. Obviously there were some very significant firefights they got into, but I think to echo what a lot of those guys were saying in the interviews, it was like a groundhog's. They can't recall Fallujah day by day because it was the amount of buildings and houses they were going into. It was just like 12 hours a day. Just house.
Yeah,
they inch their way.
Which is interesting to put together a documentary on this, because as you work through the Groundhog Day effect in your memory, the fog of war merges everything together, and then there, through timestamps, there's this clarity of how it unfolded and transpired. And then you get this awareness of the totality and the volume of the exercise in which it was for these guys. And were these guys like, holy fuck, like I almost forgot the like intricate amount of work that had to go into this.
These memories were being brought out in real time in the interviews. It's stuff that, for various reasons,
unlocked almost.
Yes, they hadn't had to think, or wanted to think about for years, but you could see it in the interviews that recollections were coming to them fresh of things they hadn't thought about in a long time. And again, they, in a couple circumstances, they had a few hours or even a day or two to bullshit with each other and kind of unlock a lot of these memories. Because it's Stephen Ambrose, when he was doing the whole Band of Brothers thing, he wrote about this, and we know this, we see this. You can interview two guys that were in the same fighting hole during the exact same fight, they're going to have two different perceptions of what was happening for various reasons. So, that was something we pulled out a lot of people, that when we were talking about that big fight I was talking about earlier, you had 10 different perspectives on what was going on, and it didn't always necessarily align with the other person's, but that's because they were just focused on their one little sector, while the guy next to them was focused on that one little sector. So their memories of that firefight are like fundamentally different.
Yeah. And so what does that mean for you to, you're removed from it almost 12 months now, as far as like that hitting the airways? Well, no, it's probably been 6 or so, but,
yeah, November 8th, something like that. Yeah.
Being such, we're both pretty passionate about history. Has the gravity of what you put together with these guys really hit you as far as like writing your own chapter of history for this nation?
Well, I'm really glad that we got to give that to them and then give it to the public, so the public better understands. I'm very proud of that. I didn't honestly, man, we didn't know. This is the first time Black Rifle basically made a feature-length film. So I didn't know what the views were going to be on it. I had no fucking idea. And I'm glad it got the good reception that it did from not only them, but the public. And, the comment section is going to comment section. So you take that out of the equation, it seems like very good response from the public that, I think it's because we were able to present them on a human level and not just some like World War II in color. This is what this general was doing to make sure his troops got in. This is the big picture. Like, we were able to show war in a very human level, at the company level, which that's the most human element of war, is at the company level.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that the way that network, so to speak, would try and present the information.
No, they'd want to get the big general, and they'd want to get the sexier interviews from, high-ranking notable names, not 25 former O1s and E3s and E4s and E5s.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, I was a firsthand kind of witness to some of the reignited friendship and stuff like that, because you brought a couple of the guys out to a couple of our different shoots that just happened to be going in conjunction with that.
That was the coolest thing I didn't, and I'm sorry to interrupt. That was the coolest thing I didn't anticipate, is not only were we able to get these guys together, Black Rifle was so freaking gracious afterwards. They got them the tickets to the suite at the Cowboys game. And then I got Ed and Tim. I hadn't seen these guys I'd seen Ed. I've seen Ed here and there over the years, but Ed and Tim, we got to hang out with each other for like 4 days, and they're like, well, I suppose I should be getting home. And I'm like, I got to go and film this commercial. You guys want to come with? They're like, yeah. And they called their wives, and we just got to hang out. And I'm like, hey, you guys want to be in the video? And they're like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like, it's such an example of, and I had nothing to do with this feature whatsoever. I was just admiring.
But you were a champion of it. You and Clint specifically were, and John too, but the Marines. But you and Clint were like really, internally, you guys were really bringing good vibes to making sure it got out there properly within the company.
Yeah. And Black Rifle's been around for over a decade now. And you look at some of the things that have been accomplished, but to me, like the capabilities to, you've been in the ecosystem since the very beginning, going back to Range 15 and stuff like that.
I think people assume my role within Black Rifle is more significant than it is, because we all were there doing silly stuff in the beginning. But I never came on board until you like pulled me in like what, 2019? I never got a paycheck from Black Rifle till like 2019.
Yeah, something like that. And you, man, to me, this is just like why the media apparatus of this company exists, is to be able to facilitate things like this. This is the why behind everything we're fucking doing. Yeah, we're selling coffee and now energy drinks and stuff like that, but there is so many layers below that of this perspective of the American veteran that we really want the public to be able to resonate with and feel like they're connected to. It shouldn't be something that's like, oh yeah, I support the troops, and that's all that gets said. It's like, no, man, I have this intricate knowledge of what these people's personalities are like, and I feel like I know them. And
they're more than war veterans. They're all different. They all took different paths in life.
Yeah, and I think, man, like because I ask these same questions, you know, to the things that I buy, and people say that, you know, we support this or we support that or we support whatever, right? But for the listeners who purchase our coffee and our product, like, you funded the capabilities for us to be able to do this. Like this is, it's not like fucking numbers floating around in the air. Like,
it's not a company that hires an ad agency out of Manhattan to run a televised commercial. Everything's done in-house and with heart and purpose.
You as Black Rifle consumers and the American public, like, you have a one-to-one. The only reason that this was able to be made is because you buy coffee.
Yeah.
You have a direct connection towards one of the most, you know, important stories that this company has ever told, because you fucking buy coffee from us. And if you're ever like, what are those guys doing? And like this is it. Like, this is what the fuck happens with the money after you buy the coffee, like doing things like this. And, you know, you'd say like, it only cost $15,000 or whatever it was. But like the point to where this happens with you specifically, Jack, as a Black Rifle employee for years, is that these things aren't just like immediate. Like, these are things that are moments of opportunity when we start thinking about like what the fuck we really want to do and the perspective that we really want to provide as an entity, as a company. It's directly related towards these personal relationships that exist over decades, not a couple months, not a couple years, like decades of work that all come together. And like, for me, this is why all of this shit exists, is so that we can do things like this, so that these American stories, good, bad, areas of gray, it doesn't matter. Like, this is history. This is American history. Like, you think back to like talking about the fucking Rough Riders. Like, imagine, Jack.
Those guys had reunions for years.
Imagine if we were able to watch a film and like the guy that was a miner or the guy that was a vaquero, and if we got to see those dudes and we got to see them and we got to listen to their stories come firsthand, we would look back on that as a time capsule of American patriotism that would exist on no other level. And that's how I see this, is that this time capsule is something that will live forever. That is like an intricate relationship towards the grittiness of what it means to be an American warfighter.
And and to what you said earlier, their families now know, because I don't think most of their families understood. And now they kind of know, or have a better idea.
Yeah.
I think it did a lot for them with their families.
Yeah.
I looked at the comments. It was a lot of like, my cousin is this guy, my cousin is that guy. I knew he was there. I had no idea.
Yeah. And you get that. It's just one of those things. It is serendipitous in the way that it comes together. It's you can't really have a negative opinion about it, because it's just like, it's just history, man. It is just the way that it was. And
that's the thing. When it gets, especially things that are in your lifetime, you don't take it personally. It happened. There's nothing you're going to do to change it. Let's look at it from an objective point of view. let's try to put ourselves in those people's shoes with whatever the topic is. But like, it's not personal. It happened.
Yeah.
Let's learn about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Jack.
Dude, thank you. Hey, by the way, thank you for letting me talk about this, because I'm very proud of that project myself, and I was not anticipating this going this way, but thank you for allowing us to talk about. I'm very proud of that final product.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm proud that that's something that Black Rifle put into the world.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
yeah, and it was the perfect thing of like, we got to do this, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity if that hadn't been a priority of the company. And then trusting me and Ryan to kind of, we were left alone.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lot of oversight there. Again, don't want to brag. It's because I wasn't spending a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember because I was talking to Evan and we were talking about, I'm like, dude, we're almost there. Like, I haven't seen a cut yet. He's like, I just watched it. I was like, whoa, what did you think?
We made some last second changes, like within 24 hours of its release.
And I remember he was like, I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to taint what you think. And I was like, oh. And then I watched it and I was like, oh my God. And I immediately call him like, this is exactly why we exist, is to do things like this.
That's good to hear. Because I never heard that. Because Evan did his Evan thing with me where he's like, yeah, it was horrible. You know, like getting into my head type of thing.
Yeah. The emotionless CEO perspective that can
yeah, well, he
exists, right?
and he broke right after that. It was like, it's good, but like he did the Evan thing where yeah,
like there's no reality where he's not gonna fuck with you.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. That's just like,
even if it's the most heavy gravity thing that you've ever existed. Yeah, like he's gonna fuck. He's
gonna find a way to mess with your head a little bit. yeah.
All right,
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, man. And again, if you haven't seen it, Warpigs on our YouTube, Black Rifle Coffee.
Still getting views.
It's a must watch. So thanks for coming on, man, and we'll do it again soon.
All right.
See ya.
Later, bro.